So this guy's criticizing Jamil Javani for something he said at the Canada Strong Network, and it's just so wrong.
Then he makes this remark about two-tier citizenship to imply that First Nations and Indigenous people get treated better than other Canadians, which is just so ignorant. The homicide rate of Indigenous women in this country is 4 times the rate of anybody who is not Indigenous.
So this opinion is actually hurting more Indigenous women, and I'll tell you why. It is true that Indigenous women and girls are victims of homicide 6 times the rate of non-Indigenous counterparts, but that doesn't debunk the two-tier citizenship claim at all, or imply that they're somehow treated worse than regular Canadians, when you consider that 86% of the time, the person accused of the homicide was another Indigenous person. In other words, the ill treatment of Indigenous people isn't by regular Canadians, they're treated horribly by other Indigenous people. And on top of that, if we crack down on these crimes more, all you're going to see is more Indigenous people being arrested, and they're already overrepresented in the prisons, which I'm sure this leftist will also use as an example of Indigenous people being treated badly. Also, I can name many privileges Indigenous people have that regular Canadians do not enjoy. That proves that they're being treated better than the rest of us. First, we have Gladue reports, where Canadian courts have to consider Aboriginal offenders' background during sentencing, which often leads to a reduced sentence. So a two-tier justice system. Poor criminal has a tough upbringing, so that excuses them from their crime. They also get tax exemptions, including property tax, income tax, and sales tax if they live on a reserve. And they have employment income tax exemptions, including EI and pension plans. They even have special social programs that are just for them. So tell me, how is this not a two-tier system where Indigenous people are treated better than other Canadians? And why is it so hard for the left to fathom the idea that all Canadians, regardless of race or background, should have the same exact rights and privileges? When are we going to give up this suicidal empathy that would endanger the lives of Indigenous women by letting Indigenous men that victimize them have shorter sentences? It makes no sense.
Where in the blue fucking hell did they find you, bud? So let's debunk what you've just said here. Oh, buddy, I'm gonna turn that off and turn that down. I'm gonna have to pause this to go back and see what you're saying, but yeah. So as far as the Gladue report goes, I don't know how you should be familiar with generational trauma, being a black guy. Black folks got generational trauma passed right down through the times of slavery, right along with First Nations and Indigenous people. So anytime you see a minority yelling at their kids, whether they're blacks, they're First Nations, they're Métis, they're Inuit, whatever, that is a sign of generational trauma. What you just spit it off there is classic colonizer settler mindset is what it is, and it's been ingrained and indoctrinated or paid to you to spit that off, because that's a bunch of nonsense. I'm going to debunk every bit of it. But yeah, when you hear parents, like minority parents, yelling at their kids as a way of communication, or hitting as a way of communication or discipline, that is generational trauma. That is where the Gladue report comes in. That is why the Gladue report is important, okay? Because most people, i.e. white people, that grew up in Canada that did not have to deal with systemic racism or generational trauma, and I'm not saying all white people didn't have to deal with it, because there is some that would be very narrow-minded me to think otherwise. But for the majority, it's always a minority that has to deal with generational trauma. That's why the Gladue report comes in. Not just that, then you got systemic racism built into this country from the ground up, and same as within America. So when they say everybody's created equal, you got to realize who they're talking about and who were considered people at that time. First Nations or Native folks weren't considered people. Black folks weren't considered people. Women weren't considered people. Who does that leave? That leaves white people, okay? That's for another reason why, about the generational trauma piece of it and the Gladue report. Because of the systemic racism right from the ground up, that the system has been directly against minorities, and i.e. First Nations in this country right from the get-go. We couldn't leave reserves unless we got the permission from the Indian agent to leave our own land, right? We some days that I've heard oral traditions that of elders walking from the reserve to the Indian agent's house and have to sit there for days at a time waiting for them to get back. Because if they left, if they were caught, they would be in extreme trouble because they weren't allowed off the reserve. Not just that, it was so long in between most reserves and the Indian agent's house that it wasn't practical anyway. That's where the Gladue report also comes in. You've spit up a pile of misinformation and nonsense in this video, but I'm going to tell you right now, and you should be ashamed of yourself. As a person of color, you should be bloody ashamed of yourself. Because if you think that it's First Nations people that are opposing black folks in this country, it ain't. It ain't. Historically, it's white people that are systematically against every minority from the inception of Canada. I've got lots of white friends. I look white. I manage, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't have to deal with a lot of what, a lot of my people up here have had to deal with because of, their long hair and the color of their skin or whatever, right? But that doesn't mean I haven't faced my own, trials or whatever, of nonsense bullshit. Anywho, but my ex-wife, she's black, and there'd be times that we would go to town and we'd go in somewheres, and they would be, as soon as we went in the store, they're focused right on her because of the systemic racism from the ground up in this country. They automatically assumed she was up to something. And not to say that I'm the one with fucking a goddamn fucking felony fucking trafficking charge walking around or conviction, right? But they're focused on her because of the systemic racism in this country. So yeah, I gotta go look and see what else you said. Now, when you cite your 86% statistic, you're leaving a lot of context out, aren't you? So there's a lot of factors that go into that. First, just because somebody accuses somebody doesn't make them guilty, first off. Second off, though, there's, and this is where the Gladue report comes in, there's systemic circumstances that factor into whatever went on. So the introduction of substances to the Americas, which is Canada and America, not just that, but the generational trauma that whoever did whatever grew up with, and possibly all that they know. Then there's other factors. Poverty is a big one, right? There's a lot of nuanced factors factored into that. But to say that 86% of missing and murdered Indigenous women are done by Indigenous men, just because that's the statistic, does not make it so. Does not make it true. In any rate, it doesn't. You can accuse somebody can accuse somebody of anything all day long. If that was the case, then the whole MMIW movement wouldn't even be a thing. Wouldn't be a thing at all. But it's most definitely a thing, and everybody knows it's a thing. Oh yeah, and the whole 2 tiers of justice. I don't even know why I should have to, explain any of this to you. You being a person of color, what the fuck, bud? But the 2 tiers of justice. A prime example to my counter of that would be, go look at Donald Marshall Jr. case. Go have a look at that, and you tell me if there's 2 tiers of justice. Yeah, because there fucking isn't. Because he was set up, he was wrongfully convicted, he was exonerated, all because he was a Mi'kmaq man and the police didn't like him. That's systemic racism. So don't give me this bullshit about there's 2 tiers of justice. Oh yeah, and before I forget too, you were going on about natives are, they get tax off this, tax off that, tax off this, blah blah blah. Oh, it's such a tired talking point. So, because of the way reserves were formed way back in the day, taxes can't be charged on a reserve, right? That means a First Nation person with a status card that's on a reserve doesn't have to pay tax. That it is what it is. But to insinuate that we can just go to any store and get tax off reserve is complete bullshit. It's nonsense. And when it comes to paying income tax, when we work off the reserve, because again, there can't be taxes charged on the reserve. So, but when we work off the reserve, we have to pay into income tax. So the whole bullshit about you going on about fucking, they don't got to pay this and they don't got to pay that, that's a fucking tired right-wing talking point too. Here's what I would say to you and whoever the fuck paid you to say all this bullshit. You don't like it. You don't like how things are going for First Nations and Indigenous people, the Métis and the Inuit in Canada. Nobody's fucking keeping you here, man. Go the fuck home. Who the fuck is keeping you here? To everybody else, Lalio,